one. And hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to another author interview here on the show, or should I say double author interview, because yes, viewers and listeners, we are back with another double author interview here on the show. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And today we're going to be interviewing two incredible people who have come together to create an incredible book. Now, a little background about our guest today. Our guest doesn't necessarily exist. He is an amalgamation of the minds of three individuals who conspired to write together. If you encounter him in the wild, that is most likely his avatar. One whose body he shares is known as Mike. There's also a chance it's Dave, whom he pilots less often. And if you encounter them both at the same time, run. The third member, of course, is a mystery. Mike and Dave grew up reading extensively and met at Georgia College, and from there, they went on to serve in the Army, from which he has since retired to go back to school. Meanwhile, Mike settled in Savannah, where he raises a daughter and works in the background check industry. Despite their separate paths, they've both been working together on the Galvorn Saga since graduating from college in 2017. So without further ado, viewers and listeners, let's give a huge round of applause to our guests today, authors Mike and Dave. Guys, welcome to the show.
Ooh, our bio is a mouthful.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so sorry about that.
I blame the editor.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, I am so excited to have you both here on the show. So before we go into your guys' story and the world you guys have created, is there anything further you guys would like to add about your individual backgrounds?
Hold on. The avatar is possessing to take control. No, I don't. You got it. That's all of it that really matters.
I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
All right. Now, for our viewers and listeners, do you have a copy of your book you'd like to hold up and share with us a little teaser of the world you guys have created?
All right, so Dave's going to hold and I'll tease. Paragon Exordium is an epic genre-bending fantasy novel. It is genre-bending because it's a contemporary military fantasy set in our world about a magical apocalypse that takes place in rural Georgia. It's got horror elements in some capacity. It's got a lot of epic fantasy elements. It's got military elements. There's a lot of different things that feed into it that make one great cohesive story that's very character-driven. It's got a unique magic system. It's heavy action. It's quick paced. It's a lot of fun, and it's written for adults but accessible to multiple ages. I would say 13 or older, really, because there's no spice or smud. There's no language, but there is some pretty heavy themes and violence to it and stuff. So the quickest pitch for it is simply it's got elves on a tank in one scene.
Oh my gosh. Elves on a tank. Okay, well, I know a few people are going to absolutely love that. So awesome. That's actually a really, really cool story, and kind of almost mirrors my own that's also set in the modern age, but I will share that a little bit later. So before we go in detail about how you guys came together to create this incredible story, let's talk a little bit more about yourselves as authors and individuals. So as a general icebreaker question, how did your guys' passions for writing come about and ultimately make you guys consider, okay, we want to pursue this and build something off of it as some form of a brand or another career path?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I grew up reading constantly. One of my earliest memories is my dad reading The Hobbit and the scene where all the dwarves get grabbed by the goblins, which is probably formative in a disturbing way. But I was in and out of libraries doing the library goals during the summers and stuff. So reading's always been a big part of my life. I got the original idea for Paragon Exordium when I was 13 after watching Red Dawn. I was like, okay, so what if we had Red Dawn, but like make it Lord of the Rings? So that's where the idea came from. And from like that age on, I started world building and throwing on concepts and writing drafts and stuff. So when I graduated high school or graduated college, I decided to sit down and start actually writing the story. Because it's like, I've got time before my wife graduates. I want to actually get into this. And that is when I dragged Dave kicking and screaming into the process. Because he was a military buddy of mine who had an English degree. So he can tell you more about why he got interested in writing and stuff, but he was dragged along for the ride.
Wow. Okay. So, Dave, you were pretty much brought in kicking and screaming, or would you just like, all right, I'll go along?
Well, a little column A, a little column B, right? As Mick said, I was pursuing an English literature degree at the time, and Mick had this story idea. It was, lingering out there, and as there is some martial element to it, as a strapping young cadet, I was asked to check in a little bit to see if it was cartoonishly over the top. We've all seen the movies or read the books where it's like, that doesn't make any sense. And I went to a movie earlier today, and that was the case, and I had to stop myself. So that was my original role, was, hey, let's do a sanity check on this and see what's up. And it went from sanity check to poking around at editing to assisting with writing, and then I was in full tilt after that. So I got suckered in, but it wasn't hard,
Awesome. That's actually really cool. That's actually amazing. And I always find it very, very interesting. I actually went to a conference not too long ago, hosted by two of my author friends, who talked about when you're co-authoring with a friend or a fellow author who shares your same interests, there does have to be this balance of, okay, we both want to tell the same story, but it has to be sort of a form of mutual respect. Like, I trust you to approach one aspect of the storytelling that I may be lacking, and you're going to trust me to take care of the other part. So when you guys were sort of developing this story, what were some of the goals you had as the authors, but also
was always sort of set up as a trilogy thing. So we had like a pretty broad plan from the very beginning to tell a pretty long and expansive story, and that was known at the time. The ways and means of how we arrived at certain plot points and things were always different, and only the overarching sort of events were kind of played out. So we kind of knew where we were going. We just didn't know how we were going to get there. And it's been like what you said about being honest with readers. It's been interesting. With this Exordium is 240,000 words, and you're asking people to commit and come on a pretty long ride just for one, and then you're saying, hey, wait, there's two more in the pipeline, the second of which is almost there. I mean, that's a big commitment for somebody, and so we try to make it as open and accessible as possible, make it easy to read and listen to in our case, and we ask for people to go pretty far, so we're very cognizant of that sort of trust that we have, and we know we have to deliver two and then one more. So
absolutely. Nick, anything further you'd like to add to that, or do you think pretty much Dave pretty much said almost the same things you were going to say?
Yeah, I mean, we're on the same page with that for the most part. Yeah, I mean, promises to the readers is a really interesting question, because Dave hit the nail on the head. We wanted to make sure it's accessible. It's epic fantasy, and epic fantasy, the tendency is to wax eloquent and use bigger language and stuff. And I do like to have some of that poeticism in it. Right. I like colorful, beautiful language, but Dave and I have sort of a rule when it comes to world building. And it's essentially, if I write something that's too much exposition or too much world building and Dave's eyes roll to the back of his head, he tells me, and we fix it, and we make it easier on the reader to digest and engage with. So it's if you like epic fantasy, you're going to enjoy it, but we wanted it to be readable. We wanted it to be
Right.
easy to read, not a challenge to read. And that's a really fine line to walk with a world building element of a story.
Absolutely. And I also like how you brought that up, when it comes to like, the world building and like the story structure. And I like that perfect example you gave, Mick, where it's like, if my co-author is not invested in the story, then typically, or maybe an aspect of the story that seems a little too confusing, then that's probably a good sign to think of, oh, probably the reader is going to have the same thing. And again, that's that whole trust, that whole bond when working on a project. As authors, because generally authors are very singular. We're often writing stories on our own. When we work with a fellow writer, that's when it gets very interesting and a little bit challenging. And that'll be touched upon when we get into the business side of being authors. But before we get to that, let's actually continue this discussion of the creation of this book of yours. So after you guys sat down, you hashed out the initial plot synopsis and overall the story, because as you guys mentioned, this is going to be a trilogy. What was sort of the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you guys were going to be working on a book together, and then learning that you guys are going to make this into a series?
My family, they're all big readers. They've been readers and have encouraged it my whole life. It's really just been very I in the author community, I have one of the most supportive families. I think I really am blessed in that. I see a lot of authors and people communicating how their family doesn't read their books, their family doesn't support it. Mine does, wholeheartedly. It was really more of a just constant, when is it coming out? When is it done? When is it done? Let me read it. When is it done? For that. And the Dave's involvement has just been, Dave wanted to get to know Dave more because he's not a direct member of my family, but he's a welcome part of my family now because he's my friend. But no questions. They're like, okay, cool. This other guy's involved. That's neat. When's it done?
Yeah, it's unique. So the original way that the story was being released was on serial on Patreon. People supported via per chapter essentially releases, and so we had friends that were friends and family that were pretty supportive, and you could see it with the dollar signs. But it did the money was just, it was to see people that were like actively involved and like, well, I want to see more of this, and we want you to keep doing this, and let's get it going. So I've always felt very supported. There's definitely people that were skeptical and still sort of are. I mean, I'm sure that's the case with many people who start out trying to write. And I believe that having this brick sitting on my desk right here sort of speaks that skepticism might not have been as warranted as they thought, but there always will be. So
absolutely, 100%. And that actually kind of leads into another question, which is one of a few reflective questions I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on. So as you guys, being an author, it's not easy, especially if you're writing like your first book, because that's the baby. That is literally something that we put the most time into to get as, perfect as possible. And especially now in today's digital age, when it comes to being, authors or growing up in this world where there are so many authors online, it's just crazy. We think, oh, we can probably contribute as well. But that does lead to the discussion of, the double-edged sword argument where, yes, on one side of the coin, we are going to meet people who are like-minded, who are going to be very welcoming, who are going to help us, and also readers who are going to be interested in our works. On the other side of the coin, we do leave ourselves exposed to hate speech, trolls, spam, negativity, everything. And that can be very detrimental to an author's, confidence and well-being. And of course, the dreaded imposter syndrome is always going to be there, just waiting to strike. So I'm very curious, when you guys began this journey and really seeing, the feedback and the early responses, did you guys ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, if not, what has disciplined you guys to continue with this world, to continue with this series, because it's just too good of a story to shelve?
My primary motivator is spite and bitterness toward George R. R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss for not having finished their series. So my books are getting done. That's one of my primary motivators in all of this is it's gonna get done one way or another. I've made contingency plans. If something happens to me, it's getting finished.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Since I came late to this, I was drawn in after the fact. I always tell Mick that I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think that it was going somewhere. And I'm confident that since it has gone and is continuing to go somewhere, I don't really have to worry about any of that. And to be fair, most criticism we've taken, I'd say it was pretty light, comparatively speaking. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen. But what very little there was, I think we try to take that in stride as best that we can and try to improve. I mean, we have we just finished, our beta readers just finished for the sequel to this novel, and we picked some harsh people on purpose because we want that to sting. We want it to know where people are coming from too. So you need it as an author, otherwise you get kind of stuck in a bubble. So.
And I mean, that's not to say we haven't faced some backlash and some negative responses and stuff, because we spent a year querying this book. Right? I queried over 100 agents and over 100 different publishers, right? And we were shot down. And so we made the difficult decision after all that. We're like, okay, well, we can keep doing this or we can self-publish. And the ultimate decision we came to was to self-publish because everyone who actually read it enjoyed it, right? And you got friends and families, you're not always going to get an honest opinion. We set it up with people who we knew we could get honest opinions from, outsourced it, and then Dave's involvement has really been the thing that's kept me off the edge in a lot of ways. Having someone along for the journey who's I know and I trust, who will tell me when something's bad, and wouldn't have done this for me with 8 years if he didn't think he was like legitimately good through the fiscal and the time and the blood and the sweat and the tears. One of my best friends has been along for the ride. So I know what we're doing is worthwhile. I don't usually struggle with imposter syndrome because I've got him to fall back on. So if I'm like, is it bad? Well, Dave will tell me and we'll make it better.
Awesome. That's amazing. Again, this is why I love doing double author interviews, because I love seeing, the camaraderie, the brotherhood, and just, this bond that we have authors that we have, that we share with others who are also, passionate about similar things, which honestly leads to a very fun question, which I love to hear your guys' thoughts on. And I'll give context to this question. So a previous guest I had on my show, I want to say a year ago, very recently, she posted on her socials that we are in a golden age of independent authors. And as I really dive deep into that question, or not question, but statement, I kind of look back at my own journey as an author, and I realized I was writing around the same time as the lockdown, the quarantine. I began writing my first 4 books during 2020, and I realized, interesting. We kind of are in a, golden age. But as I began asking this question to my guests, I'm getting a lot of different answers. Some say that we're not in a golden age, but definitely in a new age of creativity. Some believe that the lockdown sped up the new age because it was already on the rise. And some have even gone further and said that we are not in a golden age or a new age at all, is because while, yes, there is an influx of independent creations, whether that's music, painting, writing, podcasting, what have you, a majority of that is not created solely through a love of the craft. There's no passionate drive pushing it forward. So I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Are we in a new age of independent authors, or are we not?
My answer is I hope not, because tend to be a pretty optimistic person, and I think that there are other we're on the upswing of that, I believe. And you mentioned lockdown being a catalyst. We started before the pandemic all happened, but to your point, a lot of people decided or were forced to find some other creative outlets, and that sort of jogged people into doing it when they might not otherwise not have been able to. I think you are correct, and your former guests are correct in saying that we are seeing so much more out there, and that does come with things that maybe shouldn't have been computer generated, or there's other issues with this being a golden age. But I like to see it that we're on the upswing, and that tomorrow will be more. So
That is fair. That is a fair argument.
I think we're in a renaissance.
Ooh.
I think we're in an author renaissance. I think the accessibility of publishing is being shifted. I think the market is shifting. I think there has been a long time bottleneck and systematic gatekeeping of publishing for a while. And I think the people who've controlled that haven't necessarily been the best people in determining actual quality and determining what people actually enjoy and producing new things and new ideas. And so I think the market is shifting. I think people are realizing the reality that these people who have been saying only these books get published don't necessarily have any actual qualifications of any kind. They're just people who worked in a publishing house, who got promoted in a publishing house, and maybe they haven't ever actually read anything or written anything, So I think we're in a revolution, a renaissance of the mold, and the idea of indie publishing or self-publishing is becoming more popularized. And I see entire book talk channels dedicated entirely to indie authors, because people are opening books and seeing traditionally published stuff and be like, this is not good, or this is riddled with errors, in the same ratio as indie authors. That's my
absolutely. And that's very, very true. And to go one step further, the market for indie authors has greatly shifted and increased.
Yes.
Because 20 years ago, when people heard that you were independent or self-published, it was seen as a lesser form of publication, that, oh, you're not really an author, you self-publish, and the cover is very crude, the writing is very amateur. But now you can't even go into a Barnes & Noble, pick up 2 books, and really figure out, okay, which one is traditionally published and which one is independent, because it's gotten so good. And you're absolutely right, Mick, that there has been a lot of gatekeeping over the years. And to give them their credit and their fairness, I can understand why they may be hesitant to take on new authors and new voices, because for them, it's a business. They have to think of what's going to recuperate some money for them. But in the same breath, we do have to realize the market trends. What are people passionate about? What is trending? And I definitely feel for authors who want to go down the route of traditionally published, even if you don't get into the big ones like Tor Forge, Macmillan, HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, look at the smaller publishing houses. There is an influx of those, and those need a lot of love and also respect too, because I definitely feel, and you guys may agree with this or have some thoughts on this, that small press houses don't get a lot of recognition, despite the fact I have read some incredible books from small press houses.
Yeah, I'd rather be self-published than vanity press published.
Oh yeah.
I mean, anyone can technically make a New York Times bestseller if you just pay for it. I mean, I see it as a similar thing. Like you mentioned, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been seen as a positive thing at all. It's a similar thing in like the gaming industry. I mean, the indie gaming industry is massive now, and it wasn't before. And people that are unwilling to pay premium prices for things that have been, think tanked to death. You pick your favorite video game, and you'll know, right? The indie side of gaming, and for us, all of us, is there's much more freedom and creativity. And if you want cookie cutter things that all look the same, see mini covers in the airport. If you are air traveling, there's very formulaic. You can tell.
Oh
right?
yes.
It's like Nick said, is a renaissance, because some of these smaller places, if you get latched on, that want to kind of compete in that space, there's space for that. I think there's plenty, and it's the same thing that Nick had just said. Is if you want to be very selective because you're trying to be too careful, and a smaller place is willing to roll the dice, it's roll, go for it. So,
And here's the thing with the market is a good enough work can shift the entire market.
Yes, I 100%
Five
agree
Nights
with
at Freddy's, in the terms of games, that was a small indie game that inspired hundreds, if not thousands, of game developments and branches out from that. That wasn't the market at the time. So if you produce something of a high enough quality, if traditional publishers aren't willing to take a risk on it, you put it out there and it's good enough, the market will adjust to make room for it and want more of it.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, it started off as just like, an indie game. And look what happened. We have the sequels, we have spin-offs of the game. We also have a movie adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's, which for the game developers, knowing that, it's like, well, it's probably inconceivable for them. But to your point, Mick, if you create something that's going to shift it, or maybe you don't even know it's going to do that, if you're passionate about it, definitely create it, because you never know. And that segues perfectly into my favorite segment of the interview, which is the business side of being an author. Now, you guys had mentioned earlier in the interview that you guys had done a lot of research into how you wanted to publish the first book in your trilogy, and you guys decided on independent publishing. Now, I am very curious. How much research did you guys really do to make the decision that independent publishing was the best direction for you guys? And the reason I bring that up is when a lot of aspiring authors think of independent publishing, they think of, yes, I get to control all my own work, which is true. But the other side of the coin is you're in charge of marketing. You have to find the cover artist. You have to find the editor. You have to figure out, okay, how am I really going to sell my book and really get my name out there? It's all on you, as opposed to working with a publisher who has an agent for you, or maybe has a marketing planner for you, where there's a team that's going to help market your book with you.
Not nearly enough. I've seen some authors who spent so much time researching it, and they've really benefited from the amount of research they put into it. But I was at a point, and I think Dave would agree with this, when after a year in the query trenches, I was like, I don't care if it's successful or not. I just want people to read it. I had faith in the story and stuff. I think it will be. I think it's just going to take time. Is the thing. So we didn't do nearly enough research in a lot of different elements. It took me too long to get on TikTok and start promoting it through that. But we did what we needed to get started, and are there things I would do differently? Sure. There's some changes I would make if I could go back in time, but ultimately I think we made the right calls and the right decisions.
Absolutely. That's actually really, really good. That's really, really true. And you're probably the second person I've had on the show that's mentioned the query trenches, because it's, it is very true. And I've tried it myself. It is pretty much, it is a deflating feeling when you don't hear back after a long period of time and just putting all the effort in and just, well, this is not going to be good. And also, David, you mentioned, of course, vanity publishing, which can take advantage of young and aspiring authors who want to get the book out, and they say all the right things to make you want to write your name, sign the contract, and you inadvertently just pretty much sell all your rights to them, and they don't do jack squats.
Yep, and you pay them. I have a friend who recently fell victim to that I tried to caution away from it. I was like, "Are you paying your publisher?" "Yeah, I'm paying them a premium." I was like, "No, what do you don't?" And they wouldn't listen to me. So, but that was their first query.
Oh,
and like, "Ooh, I got accepted." I was like,
and yeah, I definitely rather keep more control. I'm sure there wouldn't be an author who wouldn't say that they would give up control. Now, what level you're willing to give up in order to get published is totally different, right? And right. we had plenty of query responses that were like, "Hey, it's not bad, but like, not what we're into right now." Like, well, should we have written to, like you mentioned before, to market, to type, to get it? I mean, we could have. We could have changed things and added things to it or subtracted things to it to make it more marketable, but it was already done. You know,
Yeah.
why would we want to do that? We were happy with the story we had. You know, now going forward in the future, maybe if trends are different or we want to, you know, we could. I don't see that happening, but we could do it. I mean,
I don't pay attention to trends because
Yeah.
I'm telling a story, and if Dave and I think we've told that story the way we want to tell it, and we tell it good, then the market will adjust to us.
Yeah, and if being published means being the cookie cutter exact same thing that you see on the shelf, except with different words between the and, then sorry, you knew I was going there.
I knew exactly where you're going.
I'd rather keep this and have a few hundred people, 1,000 people, whatever we're up to at this point, you know, that have read it, a few thousand people that say they love it, then it'd be watered down into generic sort of, I hate to use the word slop because a lot of people put a lot of effort and pride into their work, but if you write a great story and then your publishing house or whatever boils it down into its essential elements, I mean, you lose what made it yours, and we didn't want that.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into the next question. So a little tangent for this, but tying it back. Had a good friend of mine on the show, Raven Velasco. She is a Gothic horror author, and she was writing her first book. It was, if I remember correctly, it was a vampire story. Now, her publisher that she signed with at the time, she published to do a 3-book deal. And this is where things started to derail. And she knows this story a lot. She shared it with numerous people. But what happened was, as you said, Dave, you know, the cookie cutter mold or trying to write to the market, the publisher, I don't know the name, pretty much turned her Gothic vampire story into a romance fantasy story, even though it was not supposed to be that. And when it was published, and the romance genre, which is the largest in all the publishing industry, it's been dominating for, I think, the last 6 years or so. The readers of that genre tore my friend apart because it was not what they were expecting. And to that point, she said on interview, you can find it, she will never write romance fantasy whatsoever. And unfortunately, the publisher didn't realize the author already had an audience in mind, that she knew who her audience was. It wasn't a romance fantasy. It was more so of fans who enjoyed, you know, Gothic literature, Gothic characters, and so forth. And as authors, that's important to know, like, who the audience is. Because when we write our books, we know the audience, first of all, because it's us. But when we publish it, we really have to stick to our guns or fall back and really analyze it and think of, okay, this book is this. It has these trends. It has these themes. Who exactly is going to read this? What is the genre? So as a 2-part question, did you guys already know your guys' target audience when you began the first book? And in your opinion, when should an author take into account their audience? The drafting phase where they can do rewrites where necessary, or the marketing phase?
It's got to be before marketing. I mean, that's full stop way too far, in my opinion. I mean,
Okay.
whether you have people in mind who you hope will like it or not, like once you're done or almost done, and someone says, "Well, if there was just a love triangle in your book, we'll publish it." Like, that's a tall order, and I don't blame anybody who would do that. I really don't. I mean, it's a totally different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't blame somebody for doing that. I just don't think it's gonna be in the cards for us. We love feedback from people who've read this, read Exordium, and have their thoughts and fears and what they would want in a sequel. I can't lie and tell you that didn't influence some things that we decided to do or not, but it wasn't prescriptive, right? There was no list of like, well, this person said that guy's dumb, so we're not going to have them in the right. Feedback's good and important, and I like having it, you know, for reasons, but not you can't let it own you, you know, because people have different opinions, and we had 10 beta readers. Some people were really in tune with what was going on for the for the sequel, and then some people that like didn't get certain things. Well, then if it's a difference of opinion, what do you do, right? So you got to take some of that in stride. But once you're finished, I mean, that's too much.
That's very true. That's very, very true, Dave.
I think people get lost in the weeds of the target audience. It depends on what you're focusing on, right? So you can write an entire book with a specific target audience in mind, right? We didn't really. We have an ideal reader, and it's just anyone who loves fantasy, but that's a very wide brush to paint with. And so our focus was on telling a story. We approached tropes similarly. When we were writing, this trope was a dirty word. When we encountered a trope, it was how can we subvert this or change this or tackle this in a new way and make this interesting or avoid it entirely. Now trope is a marketing term and stuff, right? You want to have all these tropes, but that's not how stories work in my world. That's not the point. Tropes exist because they've been used and there's a reason for that, but that's not how I write. I don't write two tropes. I use them sparingly if they're there, right? And so our goal was to create a book that could be enjoyed between a dad and his son. It's a wide market. Or a dude in the military or a teenager in high school who just likes fantasy. Our market is just fantasy readers, and it's not even just fantasy readers because it's a great break into fantasy book. If you've never read fantasy before, but you like action military books, this book will make you interested in reading other fantasy books.
Awesome. And I like how you said that you guys didn't really have an audience in mind, but more so of the readers, the individual people who are going to enjoy this book, which leads to the next question, which is readership. Because, in my opinion, I think readership is probably the most difficult to market towards or write towards as opposed to the audience. Because the audience, as research is usually shown in the publishing industry, that's who all authors should market to, is like their audience. But within the audience, it's the readership. Those individual people are going to pick up our books. And in the readership world, there are 4 categories that I've come across, which is middle grade, YA, NA for new adult, and AF for adult fiction. And they have their own unspoken rules in the sense of how each readers group approaches storytelling. Like, what do they expect? And what is yay, what is nay, and how some books teeter in between, especially YA when it comes to a lot of spice, smut, and so forth. I've had a lot of authors on the show say that that's probably the one genre, or not even a genre, a marketing group that has the most, I want to use the word best I can, like infractions, where it's like they teeter on mature, even though they're trying to market towards, a young audience. So ultimately, Mik and Dave, you guys know exactly your readership, but how much of a challenge was it to really stay true to that readership? Because as we talked about before, things can change, stories can change, plot elements can change. How did you guys really stick to your guns and say, we have readerships in mind. This is for people who, like us, enjoy these types of stories, or maybe an aspect of our story that can touch a wide range of people?
Well, I'm not an expert on on us. Well, let me rephrase that. I listened to we're it's a shameless plug for us as well. We were recently a guest on the Finding the Magic podcast. One of Trisha Copeland's guests a few weeks ago was in these trenches trying to get their story published, and it's right on that cusp of, is it YA, is it new adult, is it adult fiction? And the guest made it clear that he wrote a character, and they said the publishing for YA said, well, if your character's over 14, we don't want to talk to you. Like, that's classifications like that publishers are going to use, or gets very stringent. Yeah, it's a hard line to walk. I mean, if the story's about, a coming of age fantasy, which is partially what we have. Oh, but he's 17 and a half years old, so it's new adult, and that's a difficult thing to do, and terminology seems to change pretty rapidly. So trying to keep it between the lines is almost, to me, almost kind of futile. And you almost kind of find out at the after the fact, like the post-mortem, well, who's actually reading our story and what's the age range? We have a pretty wide gulf.
Our age range is 12 to 87.
Oh, dang.
And
I'm
so,
not
that we know
exaggerating.
of.
Yeah,
that we know.
of.
And to say, oh, it's YA or new adult or this, like maybe that's a helpful tag on Amazon, but I don't think we've even been I'm certainly not been able to say, we're going to keep it new adult. Like it's hard.
And one of my philosophies when approaching it was twofold. Is I have 4 younger siblings. I wanted my younger siblings to be able to read it, but I wanted my parents to be able to enjoy it. Right. So reading the Chronicles of Narnia growing up is a delightful experience. They're books written for children, but reading them as an adult has a level of experience that is added to it in a way that is really, really magical. Right. And so that was something we wanted to try and capture. So while we wrote with a target audience of adults, we do not dumb down the language at all. The language it's not overly complicated, but it's accessible. And so our steadfast rules, at least for the primary series, the main trilogy, is there's no on-screen sex, there's no smut of any kind, and there's no cursing. Characters curse, but we don't show on-screen curse words other than a few here or there, like like PG-13 rating. You get like one here and there.
Everyone gets one.
You get your one, right? But that was a challenge in its own way because we want to have grounded scenes and have these scenes be realistic, and you've got soldiers and stuff. But that made the approach to writing them more compelling to me because I have to communicate this sense of danger, this sense of insanity, this sense of high expectations and stuff without falling back on just a person cursing over and over and over again, right? And you can do that, but you can leave it up to the reader's imagination in a clever way, right? And so
Absolutely.
It is written for adults, but it's accessible to multiple people. I don't describe it as new adult because when I see new adult, I expect a level of hand-holding. With young adult books, especially, I expect a level of hand-holding that I don't. I've read many adult-focused fictions that felt like young adult books because there's so much hand-holding in the style. So the style is adult, but it's accessible to multiple ages because we don't steer away from harder themes. We just steer away from certain things that are a little less flexible.
Absolutely. That is, very, very true. And that really comes to this discussion of staying true to our individuality as authors, which comes to a very, very powerful question, which I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on, which is context for this. As authors, we're always going to be inspired by the stories we grew up with. For me, I grew up reading the Redwall series, which is child version Game of Thrones. If you've never read it, I am not joking, viewers and listeners. Redwall is literally child Game of Thrones because your favorite character is going
seconded over here, man.
Absolutely. And Brian Jacques' works have always influenced my writing and really helped me figure out the kind of author I want to be in terms of storytelling and approaching characters. And of course, as I've gotten older, I've branched out. Victor Milan is an author I greatly admire. Bernard Cornwell is an author I greatly admire. Simon Scarrow and many more. Con Ingleton is another great author. And they've influenced me in so many ways. But I realized for me, I knew what kind of author I wanted to be. Are there going to be some elements of their writing or some of their prose in it? A little bit. But I'm not trying to be like them. I'm trying to maintain my individuality as an author because that's what I want my readers to experience when they pick up my books. I want them to hear my voice. And that's not an easy thing to do among the many trials authors have to go through. So for you guys, how was that process balancing your guys' individuality as the authors, as the creators of this incredible series, while also being mindful and respectful to the genre and the stories you guys grew up with?
I think as long as you're honest with where you came from, then you don't have to directly acknowledge it necessarily. But as long as you know where you came from, like you have, if you said, Redwall and Mossflower, the other. It's been a while, but I remember that being, great when I was younger. And if your parents read you Chronicles of Narnia. My parents read me, Harry Potter or something. I was a big Aragon fan when that came out. That was all hyped up when we were, middle school or something, when those were coming out, right? Huge influence culturally. And yeah, as long as you know where you stand, I would never pretend to try to be any of them. Right. I wouldn't want to be Christopher Paolini. I read a lot of, stuff in the Star Wars universe, which is really space fantasy. So like, I'm not Timothy Zahn. I'm not, I'm not any of these people, but you can still like take some winks and nods without, I'm going to, if you, in my opinion, if you set out to like, I'm going to be just like them, like that's you're you, man. You take your influences and you roll on. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you on that one. If you just got to be honest with yourself.
The best way to learn to write is to read. And every book you read influences your style. And so when we started this, we picked up books and we looked at books and we're like, how can we learn from these? How can we grow from these? And Dave, who is Logan Nine Fingers?
Oh boy,
Blokta, that author. Who is that?
Blade trilogy.
Joe Abercrombie. Joe Abercrombie was one we studied extensively to try because we liked his character work. Dave brought me this book. He's like, this character work is exceptional. It's exceptional. So let's look at this. Let's study this. Let's see what he does that we can study and learn from in order to improve our own character work, right? And so are we claiming we copied Joe Abercrombie? Not in the slightest, but there are things we learned from reading Joe Abercrombie. There's things I've learned from reading Patrick Rothfuss about what not to do and what to do. So it's always a question of how can you learn from what you're reading? And it's something I still try and do and still trying to incorporate into my writing style and stuff. So like Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, I just finished the other day, and I thought he did some wonderful world building with a simple thing, which he uses the term thought cage, and he uses it regularly and establishes just with that little term so much about his world. I was like, that's good. That's great world building. So that's how I've learned from that. So I'm not trying to emulate any one specific author. I want to have a distinct voice. We want to have a distinct voice. We've been working together so long that our voices sort of blended and melted into its own voice, which I think is distinct. But I want it to be lyrical, but not distractingly so. I want it to be poetic, but not boring. I want it to be cinematic is how we approach a lot of our writing. And we approach a lot of our writing through a cinematic lens too, with the cinematography in mind. Is like, here's how this scene would play out. We would fade to black here. And we just use a lot of terms like that in our writing process. And it shows, I think, in our writing is one of the reviews we get a lot is this is a very cinematic book. The details are there's just enough to give your imagination something to work with, but not bore you as you're going through it. So I think that answers the question somewhat.
Absolutely, 100%. And from what you said, Mick, about researching, there was actually a book that I have looked at once more to continue my own series, the Last Angel series, and that is the duology by Stephen Arion, which is called The Warrior and the Coward. Now, for those who've never heard of that author or that duology series, I highly encourage you to check it out because it's a really, really good story, but also how it approaches the hero's journey, which is the antithesis, is the crux of all storytelling throughout every form of genre. But what makes the duology so good is that it throws it on its head, because you're presented to a character who is described in the sagas, in the ballads, as the land's greatest hero, who slew the Lich King, who saved the world. In truth, he just got lucky, because he was the last one who survived. And this is a guy who is suffering from PTSD because he joined this band of heroes as a kid. And he literally goes in detail about how, these great warriors were killed in the most unheroic ways. Some died through alcohol poisoning. Some died because they fell in a ditch. Others froze to death. And it really threw that whole element, out the window. It's like, this is a very gritty, down-to-earth fantasy story where the guy you think is the hero, he's not a hero because he became the hero. He's the hero because he's the only one left who survived. And I absolutely loved that and how it approached it. It was different enough to be, an original idea, but yet it still had that hero's journey, even though it wasn't. And I even had a chance to meet with the author, and we become very good friends, which leads into another topic, which is networking, which is huge in the author world, because networking is, I dare say, vital, because you meet new people, you learn new skills, you branch out, and you figure out, okay, what worked for this person, how can I use it into my own arsenal, and just really grow. So for you guys, in your opinion, how important is it for authors to really network and branch out? Because as I mentioned before in the beginning, authors are very solitary individuals. Most authors may not be comfortable, branching out, but it actually will probably be a very good thing. And to add on to that, are there any people you want to give a personal shout out to who have helped you guys on this journey?
Yeah, networking is huge. If you can't network, you've got a lot of work cut out for you, and it can really cut back on that work. We network a lot. I've got an author Discord with a bunch of buddies. I'm in multiple writing Discords and stuff, and it's so essential. And it can be overwhelming, because you have to kind of figure out who you vibe with and things like that. But like, for example, a great benefit of networking is, so this is a first edition copy of the book. It's over 700 pages long. This is the third edition and current edition. It's 550 pages long. We didn't lose a word. That is the result of networking. And a friend of mine saying, oh, you have to reformat your book to re-release it because Ingram Spark messed with it. Let me help you. And they helped me reformat it and shave over 100 pages off of it.
Wow.
Huge. It's $8 cheaper in every format now.
Oh my gosh. That's actually really, really good. And I've also had a lot of friends who have also had, topics with Ingram Sparks, but that will be a discussion for another video.
That's a whole episode.
And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So besides that incredible person, are there any other people you had to give a personal shout out to who have helped you, even if it's just like getting in touch with an editor or maybe finding, a cover artist?
Yeah. So
design the covers?
That was K.R. Solberg. She wrote Remnant, the Palomar series, which is, it's like Castlevania meets The Patriot with some vampire elements. It's fun. It's Flintlock fantasy. So artist wise, like, this is one of my favorite character artists. These are characters from that, who I connected this artist to K.R. Solberg, and they started doing character art and stuff. So I love networking in that capacity. Megan G. Mossgrove is going to be our editor for book 2. And she wrote The Wingbreaker, which is a wonderful fantasy with romantic elements, that I read her book. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And she's a professional editor. So we're hiring her on for our short story collection and our second books. And just, there's so many opportunities. My book talk has grown because of networking with S.M. Campbell, who writes these sort of ocean punk books about, they're Bloodborne on the Water is the inspiration for him. And so my book talk presence grew because of networking and interacting with him, making funny videos across the internet. And he lives 10 hours away from me. So, networking is essential for sure.
Awesome. Dave, any add-ons to that?
No, I just like to add that, Mix doesn't give himself enough credit for being a charismatic and outgoing individual. And I was very, very skeptical of TikTok as a platform as the whole, and I have never been more happy to be wrong. It's been an extremely welcoming place for both of us. We've built this community now of people that are like-minded, and there's fun back and forth contests and all. Now we're sort of business partners with some people, if you want to look at it like that. That way, contracted back and forth. So I was blown away by the amount of just willingness to help without any possibility or promise of reward from people, which I think is a lot more rare anymore. And Mix hitting the social media. I went to a small convention in Savannah this weekend, and I got a few books and I got a few business cards. So and being in person means at least they're sort of local, right? And so finding those people, not just online 10,000 miles away or whatever Cormac is, right? But people that are also in your local community that can support you and you can get together with and talk. I think it's both aspects are extremely important anymore in this new Renaissance digital age of publishing.
Absolutely. You know, 100%. And you guys have given some really great, amazing answers, which we now arrive at the final question and probably the most heavy hitter. So I'll give some context to this question. So I've been doing this show now, and in general, 6 to 7 years. I was on Anchor for a majority of that time before I started doing YouTube. I've only been doing YouTube for about 3 years now. But within 3 years, I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of authors from traditional, hybrid, indie to aspiring, debuting, established, returning comic writers, artists, editors. I've pretty much almost touched almost all the bases. I just need more narrators and I'd be golden. But ultimately, I've learned so much from all these incredible people that I've come to realize in the publishing industry and in the world of being authors, there are two paths, or I think there are two paths. And first path is to be an author. That is an individual who is dedicated to the craft, who's dedicated to storytelling, not motivated solely by money. But let's be honest, it would be nice to get a bit of paycheck here and there. Now, the second path to be known as an author is the one that's most enticing, because that is, you know, the marketing side. That is growing one's brand, growing one's career. And ultimately, both paths lead to the same end goal, which is world-renowned success and literacy acclaim. However, a lot of my guests on the show have agreed that the second path is very enticing to new authors and aspiring authors, in the sense that, oh, we can just create a book and we'll be able to be multimillionaires overnight. That is not the case. This industry is not a get-rich-quick money scheme. Your goals have to be realistic. And the hard truth of the matter, if someone were to go into this industry, is this: there's no guarantee your book's going to be a financial success, or at the very least, start your legacy as an author. There are exceptions to that rule. Just like in any industry, there are exceptions, but that's what they are. Exceptions, because generally speaking, again, not every author is going to be a financial success, and not every book is going to be a Pulitzer Prize winner. And that could be deflating to some authors, but it comes down to ultimately realistic goals and expectations. So with all that said, here is the question. With everything you guys have learned in your guys' career, coming together to create this book, as well as expand upon the world to make it into a trilogy and possibly beyond, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors who are going into this industry and, you know, realizing that, yeah, there is no guarantee and they may be stuck, but then you can tell them, saying, you shouldn't see it as a negative. You should see it as a growing process, because as authors, we grow with our work and we only get better as time goes on.
Mick's probably tired of hearing me saying this, but one of my you know what, you think you know what I'm gonna say?
No, go ahead.
Okay. One of my favorite quotes on this, and writing can be just like any other thing when you first start out, is that all of us are apprentices in a craft where no one becomes a master.
Ooh, I like that. That is really good.
I didn't come up with it. It's Ernest Hemingway, so I can't take credit, right? But that's true of writing, as it is true of almost anything else in your life, right? If you expect instant success, you're unlikely to find it, barring extreme luck. This is a long process for us. I mean, we started in 2017, and in May 2023 was when the thing was published. Now it's kind of a monster, right? If we would have broken it down into its component parts, maybe it would have been out faster, but that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to take it slow and do it right. And we got faster for the second one, and undoubtedly we'll be faster as it goes on, because we're perfecting it. We're getting better as we go. And you can't expect to just hit it out of the park your first day. And that's for sports. That's for anything in life. So if you want to start out, I mean, yeah, of course, do your research. Like Mick said, read as much as you can, different people, to get different perspectives, you know, find out what you want to write about, and find out what you like, and then you have to start. And the what worked for us, and I imagine will work for many other people, is having somebody that you are accountable to in some capacity is paramount. If you want to sit in a room in your drawing room and there's a thunderstorm outside and pen your magnus opum, most people can't do that unless you're Mary Shelley or something, right? And even she had a writing group. So having someone who is there to tell you, hey man, give you some help, give you some criticism, keep you on the track. It's great for us. I'm sure it will be helpful for other people. And just knowing that someone out there is reliant on this, whatever you are writing, to be finished, is extremely motivating. At least it is to me, man. And that doesn't have to be another writer. It could be anybody. And that, even if it's a family member or a friend, just like, hey, how's that book going? How's that story going? What do you need help when you're stuck? What do we do? Just having somebody there to kind of even just push you a little bit when you get stuck or you get demoralized. That's incredibly valuable. And so it's not possible for everybody. It won't fit for everybody, but that's all that I can say for someone who's just starting out. Find a buddy. Get going.
Awesome. That is incredible. Mik, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Your characters can live a million lives, but if you don't get them done, they won't live any.
Okay, that is two.
That's off the dome.
Great quotes.
Yeah. Oh.
I just came up with that.
Well, that's a really good one. My goodness.
Write that down. Motivational quote for threads later.
But that is really, really true. And honestly, it is. I have no words to say, because you guys gave some of the best answers to this question, because especially the quotes, easily those are probably the best quotes I've ever heard on this show. And to cap it off, to end it, ultimately, in this industry, as we've talked about, it is a grueling process, viewers and listeners. It's not going to be easy. It may be your 10th book, maybe your 15th book or 20th book, but one of your books that you write is going to be the start of your legacy. You just have to have the patience and the time. And when that does happen, when you do reach that status, you can then tell people, if you've enjoyed this, you can enjoy this as well. And you'll have a loyal fan base that's been by your side, and you also get new fans. And at the end of the day, our works are going to outlive us, because that is why we remember works like Tolkien and Frank Herbert's Dune. Why we still talk about them, even though the authors have been gone for many years, is because they left behind such a powerful legacy. And words carry meaning in the publishing world. And it's up to us as authors to give them life, to breathe into them. And with that said, viewers and listeners, we are now done with this amazing double author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to Mik and Dave for coming on the show. We wish them all the best going forward into 2025. Now, Mik and Dave, where can people follow you on social media if they want to stay up to date with the series? And where can people buy the first book in the trilogy?
Mikel Melwasul on all platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Threads. I'm everywhere. Dave's nowhere. If you want to hear from Dave, you have to follow the newsletter on Substack. It's the only thing he does to communicate with people.
In Discord.
in the Discord. But you have to be reading the book to get in the Discord. That's the key. The book is available everywhere books are. It's available on every platform you can get in your local library. If you send proof to me that you got in your local library, I'll send you a free ebook copy. It's available on Audible. Our audiobook is incredible. I have signed copies. If you just look up Paragon Exordium or Mikel Melwasul on Etsy, you can get a signed copy. Yeah.
Awesome.
We're all over the place.
All right. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for an amazing double author interview here on the show. Again, a huge thank you to Mik and Dave for coming on the show. We wish them the very best going into 2025 with the series. Make sure to follow them and stay up to date with any updates for the series and possibly some new ones in the pipeline. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the next episode.